My next patron question is from Benjamin, who wants to know what are some books that have only one film adaptation that I would like to see be adapted again. Something I've long felt is that every book should be adapted at least twice, as I do think it's interesting to see more than one interpretation of the same source material. After all, why should only one director have dibs on the story? And what if a fan of the book is disappointed with the one adaptation that exists? There are a number of books I would like to see given another go if possible. One that came to mind upon receiving this question was Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nim by Robert C. O'Brien. This was of course adapted into an animated film directed by Don Bluth in 1982, and it is a good movie. However, it also departs from the book in several ways and added a more mystical element. It was announced in 2015 that MGM had acquired the rights to produce a new film adaptation, and this caused quite an uproar from people who did not want to see Bluth's film be remade, even though the announcement was very clear that this would be an adaptation rather than a remake of the animated film. That reaction actually inspired me to give the book a read, and I found it very engrossing and an imaginative story. The initial report of this new adaptation is that it would be primarily an origin story about how the Rats of Nim became hyper-intelligent and started their society, and if you read the book, it makes sense why that was the route the filmmakers were considering. Even though Bluth's adaptation only spends a little bit of time on the Rats' backstory, O'Brien devotes entire chapters to explaining how it all went down, so there's plenty of material to work from. Of course, a straight film adaptation telling the story of Mrs. Frisby would also work. In 2017, James Madigan, an Emmy-winning visual effects supervisor and second unit director, became attached to direct the movie, and then a few years later, the Russo brothers became involved as producers. However, those have been the only updates since the initial news. In 2021, there was an announcement that Fox had picked up an animated series based on the Rats of Nim, but that's been the only update so far, which suggests it probably got stuck in development. It's a shame, as I do think a new adaptation has a lot of potential. Another book that comes to mind is Max Brooks' World War Z. There was a film adaptation starring Brad Pitt, but it was pretty much an adaptation in name only. The book documents a zombie apocalypse and features a bunch of interviews with various people who detail the spread and impact on the world. After Paramount bought the film rights to the book, they hired J. Michael Straczynski to write the screenplay. Brooks praised his script, which he felt did an incredible job of making his book work as a narrative film. However, for whatever reason, that script was entirely discarded, and the filmmakers just decided to make a globe-trotting zombie movie that had little to do with the source material. After the success of the movie, Paramount decided to move forward with a sequel, and Brad Pitt was able to convince David Fincher to sign on. Considering Fincher's sensibilities, it's possible he would have directed something more in keeping with the style of the book. But we'll never know because after a number of drafts were written and location scouting had even begun, Paramount chose to pull the plug. I think enough time has gone by since the release of World War Z that maybe someone could try getting a more faithful adaptation off the ground. I've long envisioned it being done in a mockumentary style myself. I feel that would best capture the feel of the book. Now, I know the question was related to books that have only been adapted once, but I do want to bring up a film adaptation I've long fantasized about, and the reason this has not happened yet is probably because of how revered and beloved one particular movie is. I'm referring to The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. I love the 1939 film like most everyone else, but it's also very different from L. Frank Baum's original book. That movie opted for a Technicolor musical, and it absolutely works for it. It's considered a classic for a reason, and yet it so supplanted Baum's book in the public consciousness that even productions like Oz the Great and Powerful and Wicked, which legally cannot use elements from the 1939 film without permission from Warner Brothers, still take a heavy amount of inspiration from it. Curiously, the movie that most captures the tone of Baum's writing is Return to Oz, which was hated by critics at the time for being a lot darker and more frightening than the classic musical. I would personally be very interested in seeing a non-musical big-budget adaptation that sticks closer to the spirit of the book, and considering Hollywood's love for franchises, you would think studios would leap at the opportunity to adapt a series that has 14 books. But I feel like any announcement would lead to people upset at the studio producing a remake. In fact, that's exactly what happened in 2021, when it was announced New Line was developing an adaptation of the book with Nicole Kassell, renowned television director, attached. People saw the headline of a new Wizard of Oz movie being made and got angry. I don't know if that project is still happening though, which would be disappointing. Anyway, what are some books you would like to see given another film adaptation? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for the question, Benjamin.